You're listening to the top cheating audio stories. Enjoy your listening experience. If someone had told me that a crumpled piece of foil could dismantle a decade of marriage, I would have laughed in their face. But there I was, standing in the garage, staring at the shiny condom wrapper I'd just fished out from under the passenger seat of my wife's car. My heart didn't just sink. It plummeted into an abyss I didn't know existed. The minute I walked through the door, I knew it was going to be one of those nights. The house was quiet, too quiet. The hum of the fridge was the only sound as I tossed my keys on the counter. It was just after 8. Later than usual, sure, but Megan wasn't one to let that slide anymore. She was on the couch, phone in hand, her face lit by the screen. She didn't even glance up when I came in. Typical. "Hey," I muttered, cracking open the fridge for a beer. I could feel her eyes on me now, probably that look she gave when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I was paying attention, I just wasn't ready to deal with it. "Late again," she said, her voice flat, like it was just another line she had to deliver in this bad play we were stuck in. She didn't even bother adding a question mark at the end. I shrugged, already feeling the headache creeping in. Things ran long. Crew was behind on a foundation pour. "You always have an excuse, don't you?" she shot back, setting her phone down with a little too much force. "Guess I'll just start telling the kids you live at work now. Maybe they'll actually recognize your face." I took a long swig of my beer, the cold liquid sliding down, but doing nothing to cool the tension in the room. "Can we not do this tonight, Megan?" She stood up, arms crossed. "Do what?" "I'm just making a point." Or, "Does that interrupt your important work schedule?" I knew better than to snap, so I kept my voice even. "I'm doing what I can, Megan. Someone's got to keep this place running." Her eyes flicked over me like I was another job she couldn't stand doing. "Yeah, you got that down all right. Everything else? Not so much." I didn't answer. What was the point? This was our routine now. Her cold sarcasm, my silence. A well-rehearsed performance we both hated. I walked upstairs without another word. The next morning, I left the house early. Megan had the kids dressed and ready for school before I even had a chance to get a decent cup of coffee. She avoided looking at me, which made things easier, but it still felt wrong. As if I'd already missed the chance to fix whatever had broken between us. Or maybe I never had the chance in the first place. Work was the usual grind. The crew was rowdy, cracking jokes as we poured a foundation for a new condo. I kept busy, payroll, supplies, meeting deadlines, the kind of stuff that gave me the perfect excuse to tune out everything else. By noon, I was tired, my body aching, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't shake the way Megan had looked at me last night, disconnected, like I wasn't even there. Maybe I wasn't. Not really. It was Friday, and I figured a stop at the coffee shop Megan worked at would break the tension. Maybe we could talk if we even knew how anymore. When I pulled up to the shop, something felt off before I even walked in. I couldn't explain it, just a feeling. I stepped inside, expecting to see Megan behind the counter, but my eyes landed on someone else instead. A guy, tall, probably in his 20s, was leaning against the counter, chatting with her. Megan was laughing, and not that polite, "Oh, you're funny" kind of laugh. She was laughing like she meant it, her eyes alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. I stopped in the doorway, frozen, watching them. He leaned in closer, grinning like he knew exactly what he was doing. Megan brushed her hair back, her smile lingering longer than it should have. The back of my neck prickled. I couldn't explain why, but it felt wrong. Everything about this felt wrong. I wasn't the jealous type. Never had been, but seeing her light up for someone else, I couldn't ignore it. I clenched my jaw and turned on my heel, heading back to my truck. I didn't want to make a scene, not there. Not now. It was probably nothing, just a conversation between coworkers. But that feeling, that damn feeling, kept gnawing at me the whole drive home. The next few days passed in a blur of routine, but something had shifted. Megan started leaving for work earlier, staying out later. She said she was picking up extra shifts, helping out when the shop got busy. I didn't question it yet, but I started noticing little things. She'd check her phone constantly, smirking at whatever message popped up. She didn't talk to me about her day anymore. Not that we had much to say to each other anyway. The distance between us wasn't just emotional anymore. It was real, and growing wider by the second. It wasn't until Saturday afternoon that I got the real gut punch. I decided to show up at the shop again, this time thinking I could surprise her. Maybe take her out for lunch, get away from the kids for a bit. I had good intentions, at least, but when I stepped inside, the air felt thick. The shop was busy, but all I could focus on was Megan, standing behind the counter, talking to him again. The same guy. He was back, and this time he wasn't just making her laugh. He leaned in close, too close, his hand brushing against hers as she handed him a coffee. I clenched my fists, standing there like an idiot, staring at them. Megan hadn't noticed me yet, and I wasn't sure if I wanted her to. Part of me wanted to walk right up and demand to know what the hell was going on. But the other part of me, the part that was tired, confused, and afraid, held me back. What the hell was I afraid of? I watched them for another minute, my pulse pounding in my ears. Megan glanced up, finally spotting me. Her smile vanished, replaced with that familiar, guarded expression. "Oh, David," she said, her voice catching like she hadn't expected me to be there. I walked over slowly, keeping my eyes on her, though I could feel the guy's gaze burning into me from the side. I thought I'd stop by, grab a coffee. Maybe we could talk. Megan wiped her hands on a towel, her eyes darting to him and then back to me. "Yeah, sure. It's just really busy right now." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I see that." She was uncomfortable. That much was obvious. And the guy, he didn't say anything, but his smirk told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just some random customer. He knew exactly what he was doing. I turned away, my hands clenched tight, and headed for the door. Something was definitely wrong, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. Not until I had more proof. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying that scene, Megan smiling, laughing, the way her whole body seemed to come alive around that guy. I didn't know who he was, but I knew he wasn't just another customer. The feeling gnawed at me. Deeper now. Something was off, and I was going to find out what it was. I don't know exactly when it happened, but something shifted in the days after I saw them together. Megan had always been distant, but now it felt like she was actively slipping away, like she was living in some world that didn't include me. And I had no clue how to pull her back. Maybe I didn't even want to. She was getting up earlier, leaving the house before I was out of bed. She'd say it was for extra shifts at the shop, but it didn't add up. There weren't that many lattes to pour. She started staying out later, too, coming home long after the kids were in bed. When she walked in the door, I could smell it, the faint scent of something unfamiliar. Not her usual perfume. It wasn't strong, just a whiff, like a trace of something that didn't belong. I didn't ask her about it. I wasn't ready for the answer. But the lies were starting to pile up. I could see it in the way she avoided eye contact, how she mumbled something vague when I asked about her day. Her phone was glued to her hand, and she'd smile down at it like she was reading some inside joke meant for someone else. I caught her once, her thumb moving quick across the screen, typing furiously. She didn't hear me come in from the garage. When she noticed me standing there, she jumped, slipping her phone in her back pocket like it burned her. "Who are you texting?" I asked, keeping my tone casual, though I could feel the tension crawling up my spine. She laughed, but it was forced. Too quick. "Just the girls from work? They're always chatting about nonsense." I didn't believe her, but I didn't push. Not yet. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was reading too much into things. But deep down, I knew. I could feel the truth creeping in, dark and ugly, ready to unravel everything. A few days later, I decided to surprise her. I hadn't been home much, and when it was like we were living two separate lives under the same roof. I thought maybe if I did something small, something thoughtful, it would ease the tension. So, I went out to the driveway to clean her car. It was something I hadn't done in a while. Just another task I'd let slide in the chaos of everything else. I figured I'd vacuum the seats, maybe get it detailed as a surprise. Something to show her I was still trying. I opened the passenger door, leaned in to grab the floor mats, and that's when I saw it. A small, crumpled wrapper wedged between the seat and the center console. Silver and shiny. A condom wrapper. My breath caught in my throat. We hadn't used condoms in years. Not since we decided we were done having kids. There was no reason for that to be there. Unless I felt my chest tighten, my hands still gripping the vacuum hose like I might crush it. For a second, I just stood there, staring at the damn thing, my brain trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was old. Maybe it had been stuck there for months. Maybe, but no. It was new. It didn't look like something that had been forgotten. I stuffed it back where I found it, slamming the car doors shut. My mind was spinning, a mixture of anger, hurt, and something else I couldn't name yet. I needed to know for sure. I needed to stop pretending that this was all in my head. Meanwhile, Megan's world was spiraling in the opposite direction. She didn't know it yet, but I had started watching her more closely, picking up on the little things, the extra time spent in the bathroom, the hush phone calls, the hurried explanations when I asked where she'd been. But there was another side to all of this, something darker, and it wasn't just about her and me. It was about him, Kyle. They had started meeting more often, not just at the shop. She was lying to me about the shifts, using work as a cover. He would show up when he knew I was at the site, sliding into her life like he belonged there, giving her everything I hadn't. And Megan, she let it happen. At first, she thought it was innocent, just a harmless escape, someone to talk to. But it grew fast like fire catching dry leaves. The more he gave her attention, the more she craved it. They started meeting at random places around town, quiet corners, parks, even his apartment. It wasn't just the excitement of sneaking around. It was something else. It was how he made her feel like she mattered. He'd tell her she deserved more, that she was wasted on someone like me. He played her dissatisfaction like a well-tuned instrument, pushing the right buttons until she couldn't say no. You deserve more than being someone's afterthought, Meg, Kyle told her one night after they had shared a few drinks at some dive bar. He had leaned in close, his hand brushing hers, that same confident smirk on his face. Don't you ever want to be the main event? Megan looked at him, her defenses crumbling. It was everything she had been feeling, but never said out loud. She felt invisible at home. And here was Kyle, seeing her like no one else did. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said it all. They were on a crash course, and neither of them was willing to hit the brakes. Later that week, I started noticing that Megan was making more excuses to stay out. Errands, late-night coffee runs. Even when she wasn't working, she'd find reasons to leave the house. I wasn't an idiot. I knew she wasn't just running to the store. There was always that nagging feeling in the back of my mind that something was wrong. But that damn condom wrapper was still sitting in the back of my thoughts, taunting me. It wasn't until I picked up her phone one morning, just to check the time, that I saw a name flash across the screen. Kyle. A message popped up, a smiley face, and then a simple, "Can't wait to see you later." I put the phone back down like it was poison. My heart raced, and I felt that familiar wave of anger and suspicion rise up. There was proof staring me in the face. Kyle, that guy from the coffee shop. Everything clicked into place. The late nights, the laughter, the lies. She was seeing him. But Kyle wasn't just some charming guy who made her feel good. No, it was more than that. There was something else, something I hadn't figured out yet. He wasn't just after Megan. He was after me. I could feel it in the way he looked at me that day at the shop. That smirk like he knew something I didn't. This wasn't just about a fling. This was about revenge. I didn't know why or how, but I could sense it. There was something else lurking beneath the surface, and I was going to find out what it was. I wasn't going to let him tear apart my life without a fight. I couldn't sleep that night. Megan was beside me, her breathing steady and slow, while my thoughts raced like a train without brakes. The condom wrapper still haunted me. The message from Kyle, that smug little smiley face, the casual "can't wait to see you," it all screamed betrayal. But I hadn't said anything to her yet. I couldn't. Not until I knew more. Confronting her, without proof, that would lead nowhere except a fight I wasn't ready for. So, I waited. I watched. Around midnight, I slipped out of bed and into the living room, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound cutting through the silence. Megan had left her phone on the coffee table, face down, and I knew this was my chance. My hands were sweating as I picked it up, but I forced myself to stay calm. I swiped the screen, trying the passcode, our son's birthday. It opened. There it was. Text from Kyle. Messages that made my stomach twist. Kyle, last night was amazing. When can we meet again? Last night? I scrolled further, my fingers shaking. They weren't just flirting. This wasn't some harmless connection. They'd been meeting for weeks, maybe months. I skimmed through more texts, the content getting worse with each one. Kyle, you look so hot today at the shop. Too bad we couldn't sneak off again. Sneak off again? I felt a wave of nausea. My grip tightened on the phone, my knuckles white. The urge to smash it against the wall was nearly unbearable. I didn't want to see more, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know how far this had gone. There were photos. Nothing explicit, but enough. Selfies of them together, Megan smiling like she hadn't smiled with me in years. Kyle with that arrogant grin on his face, like he owned the world. I shut the phone off and placed it back on the table, my mind racing. This wasn't just a fling. This was something else. And yet I still didn't know why. Why Kyle? Why now? The way he seemed to be worming his way into her life. It felt calculated. Too smooth. Too intentional. I sat down, staring at the dark screen of the TV, my heart pounding. Confronting her now would be satisfying, sure, but it wouldn't give me the full picture. Kyle was the missing piece. He had to be, and I needed to know what his angle was. The next morning, Megan moved around the kitchen like nothing had changed. She was making breakfast for the kids, half focused on her phone again as she flipped pancakes. I watched her from the table, barely touching my coffee, studying the way she glanced down at the screen every few minutes. She thought she was being subtle, but I saw it. She was waiting for something. I cleared my throat. Seems like you're working more shifts at the coffee shop lately. Must be quite the popular hangout. Megan paused, turning toward me with a forced smile. Yeah, it's been busy. People coming in at all hours. You know how it is. I nodded slowly, setting my mug down. Yeah, I bet Kyle's keeping you company too, huh? Her reaction was subtle, but I saw it, a flicker of surprise, then quick recovery. She turned back to the stove, flipping a pancake without missing a beat. Oh, he's just a regular customer. Comes in for coffee like everyone else. That was it. She was lying, plain and simple. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. The kids ran in from the living room, breaking the tension, but I kept my eyes on her. She wouldn't meet my gaze. Later that day, when Megan took the kids out to run errands, I stayed behind. I wasn't in the mood for family outings, not with the weight of what I knew pressing down on me. Instead, I focused on digging deeper, and this time I wasn't stopping until I had something concrete. I sat down with my laptop, typing in Kyle's name. It didn't take long to find him. His social media was plastered with photography gigs, artsy shots of city streets, faces, and moody black and white portraits. He looked every bit the smooth, charismatic type, someone who thrived on attention. But it wasn't his feed that got me. It was the comments, the tags, the little connections that started linking him to places I recognized. Then it hit me. One of the names in his posts rang a bell. James Delaney. I hadn't heard that name in years, but suddenly it was all coming back. James had worked for me on a job site years ago. He was a solid worker, one of the guys I'd actually trusted. But things had gone south after a big project mishap. We were over budget, behind schedule, and someone had to take the fall. It had been James. I hadn't seen him since I let him go. He had spiraled, rumors of him drinking, losing jobs, sinking lower. I never heard what happened to him after that. But now, seeing his name tied to Kyle, it started to make sense. Kyle wasn't just some random guy. He was James's younger brother. It clicked in a place like a punch to the gut. Kyle wasn't after Megan just because he was attracted to her. He was after me. This was payback. He wanted to tear me down, piece by piece, starting with the one thing I cared about most, my family. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had to play this right. If I confronted him now, he'd slip away, find another way to strike. I needed to be smart, to find out how deep this ran before I made my move. Megan was caught in the middle, but I couldn't let her know I was onto them. Not yet. That evening, things were tense. Megan could sense the shift in me, but she didn't push. We had dinner with the kids, making small talk, going through the motions of being a family. But my mind was elsewhere. On Kyle, on the past, on what he'd do next. After the kids were in bed, Megan finally sat down beside me on the couch. She looked tired, but there was something else in her eyes. Guilt, maybe. I couldn't tell. You okay? She asked, her voice softer than usual. I forced a smile, leaning back. Yeah, just been thinking a lot about work. Things are piling up. She nodded, not pressing further. The silence between us stretched again, more awkward than it had been in years. And then, out of nowhere, she said it. I saw Kyle today. At the shop. I stayed quiet, waiting. He asked about you, she continued, hesitating. Said he'd heard about you from his brother. There was the opening I needed. I kept my tone casual, but inside, everything was on high alert. Oh yeah? What did he say? She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. Not much. Just, how you work together. Said you were always in control. Always had the final word. My jaw tightened, but I stayed calm. Yeah, I guess that's how it goes. Megan shifted in her seat, uncomfortable. He seemed, I don't know, just talks a lot. Tries to get in your head. I glanced at her, trying to read between the lines. And does he get in yours? She didn't answer right away. But when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, almost fragile. Maybe. That night, as she lay beside me again, I stayed awake. My plan was forming. Kyle had played his hand, and I was starting to see the full picture. He wasn't just trying to seduce Megan. He was trying to dismantle me, brick by brick. But I wasn't going to let him win. Not yet. I knew what was coming now. The truth had laid itself out in jagged, ugly pieces, and I'd seen it for what it was. Kyle wasn't just some random guy who wandered into my life and took what didn't belong to him. He'd been planning this, inching his way in like a snake through the grass. I could almost admire the strategy if it wasn't my life he was tearing apart. But now it was my move. I bided my time, playing the role of the oblivious husband while Megan continued sneaking around, lying with that same tired smile she used to give me when we first met. She thought she was clever, but every time she stepped out, every late shift, every coffee run, I knew exactly where she was. With him, she'd sit across from me at the dinner table, picking at her food, her eyes always darting to her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. The excuses were endless. She was more exhausted than usual, more distracted. But there was one thing that never changed: her distance. It was like she was standing on the other side of some invisible line, separated from me by this growing web of lies that only she and Kyle knew how to navigate. A week after I'd found the messages and started piecing everything together, I sat down with my crew. It was late, after a long day on the site, and we were nursing beers in the back of a dive bar downtown. The place was dark, loud, perfect for blending in. I trusted these guys. They weren't just co-workers. They were the kind of men who'd been through enough shit that loyalty wasn't something you questioned. It was given. I hadn't told them much yet, just that things weren't right at home. They knew Megan, had seen her at the occasional barbecue, family gatherings. She was always the same, polite, smiling, but distant. None of them were surprised when I started to let things slip. Something's off, I said, taking a slow sip of my beer. She's been running around, making excuses. There's someone else. I let that hang in the air for a second. The weight of it didn't surprise them. Not after all the late shifts, the stories I'd half-shared over the years about how things weren't like they used to be. What do you want to do? Asked Mike, one of the older guys on the crew. He wasn't one for drama, but he was always down for a fight if it came to it. I didn't answer right away. My eyes were fixed on the condensation sliding down the side of my glass. And for a moment, I let the silence settle between us. I had been planning this for days now, the idea swirling in my head like a storm waiting to break. I wanted Kyle to feel the same gut-wrenching betrayal that I had. I wanted him to know exactly what it felt like to have your life ripped apart by someone you trusted. But I wasn't ready to reveal everything. Not yet. I'm going to handle it, I said finally, my voice steady. But I need you guys in on it when the time comes. There were no questions, no pushback, just nods of understanding. These men weren't here to ask why. They were here to act when I needed them to. In the meantime, I had to keep playing the game with Megan. And Kyle. Especially Kyle. I knew he was pushing her further from me, drawing her into whatever twisted version of revenge he had in mind. But the longer I waited, the more dangerous it became. Every day that passed felt like another knot tightening around my neck, waiting to strangle the last bit of control I had left. Megan still hadn't caught on that, I knew. She continued with her charade, slipping out in the afternoons, coming home late, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. One night, after she had tiptoed into the house around 11, I decided to push. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, my mind buzzing with the anger I'd been swallowing for weeks. When she walked in, I didn't say anything at first. I just let her fumble around, hanging her coat up like it was some normal evening, like everything between us hadn't shattered. "You're late," I said finally, my voice cutting through the quiet. Megan stopped mid-step, glancing at me over her shoulder. "Yeah, work was busy. Sorry." There it was again, the lie, rolling off her tongue as if it didn't matter, as if she didn't even have to think about it. I turned my head slowly, meeting her eyes. "You must be working more shifts at that coffee shop than a CEO at this point." She froze just for a second. Her hand faltered as it reached for her bag, but then she regained her composure. She didn't respond right away, just forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I told you we've been short-staffed." I stood up, my movements deliberate, my gaze never leaving her. "Yeah? Funny, 'cause I hear coffee shops don't usually stay open past 10. Her eyes flickered with something, panic, guilt, maybe a mix of both. She tried to brush it off, turning her back to me. "I don't know what you're getting at, David, but I'm tired. I'm going to bed." I didn't move. My voice came out cold, sharper than I'd intended. "We're living in two different worlds now, huh? Guess we'll see which one crashes first." She stopped in her tracks. For a moment, I thought she'd turn around, say something. Anything. But instead, she walked away, leaving the room like a ghost, disappearing into the night. The days stretched on, and Kyle kept pulling her further into his orbit. I could see it in the way she started drifting, emotionally untethered. She spent more time out of the house, leaving me with the kids. She didn't even bother explaining anymore. She'd smile, kiss our son and daughter goodbye, and head out like her absence was expected, like it was just part of our routine now. But what Kyle didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I was ready for him. He thought he could waltz into my life, ruin everything, and walk away unscathed. But I had my own plans, and I wasn't going to let him slip away so easily. Kyle wasn't just trying to win over Megan. He was trying to destroy me. I could feel it in every smirk, every glance he threw my way when he came by the shop. He was chipping away at the foundation of my life, little by little. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. It wasn't long before things escalated. One night, after Megan had left for another one of her shifts, I followed her. I didn't tell her, didn't tell the guys, just slipped out of the house, got in my truck, and tailed her from a distance. She drove across town, the streets familiar yet distant, as if I was seeing them through someone else's eyes. I knew where she was going before she even turned down the street. Kyle's place, a small apartment complex tucked away on the edge of the city, near the river. I parked a block away, far enough not to be noticed, but close enough to see her. I watched as she got out, smoothed her hair, and headed toward his building, like she belonged there. I waited. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. But I didn't go after her. Not yet. I had a plan. I wasn't going to confront them here, in the dark, where no one could see. No, I was going to make this count. I was going to drag Kyle into the light, expose him for the piece of shit he was, and watch him crumble. I started the truck and drove away, my mind buzzing with the next steps. I was going to end this. And when I did, Kyle would wish he'd never laid eyes on Megan. The tension had built to a point where it felt like something had to break. I knew Kyle wasn't going to back off, and Megan had made it clear, whether she realized it or not, that she was in deeper than either of us could handle. But I was ready. I'd bided my time, waited for the right moment, and now I had my crew behind me. It was time to send a message. I'd kept most of the details about Kyle to myself. My guys didn't need to know who he really was or why he had wormed his way into Megan's life. All they needed to know was that he had crossed a line, and it was time to push back. It was a Thursday night, and Kyle was working one of his freelance gigs, snapping pictures for some second-rate event at a bar downtown. The place was nothing special, a dimly lit dive that attracted college kids and wannabe artists trying to make it big in the city. I knew Kyle would be there, his guard down, thinking he was untouchable. I was waiting outside with Mike and a couple of the other guys from the site. We weren't planning to make a scene, but we were definitely planning to leave an impression. I lit a cigarette, watching the door as people filtered out of the bar, one by one, their laughter and voices echoing off the empty street. It wasn't long before I saw him, Kyle, camera slung over his shoulder, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. I stubbed out the cigarette, feeling the adrenaline kick in. There he is. The guys followed my lead, stepping out from the shadows. Kyle didn't notice us at first. He was too busy checking his phone, probably texting Megan, telling her how much he couldn't wait to see her again. The thought made my blood boil. We closed in on him quick and quiet. Mike was the first to reach him, grabbing Kyle by the back of his shirt and shoving him hard against the brick wall of the bar. Kyle let out a grunt. The wind knocked out of him as his camera clattered to the ground. What that Kyle started, but I cut him off with a fist to the gut. He doubled over, gasping, his eyes wide with shock. I didn't give him a chance to recover. I grabbed him by the collar, slamming him back against the wall. You think you're smart, huh? Think you can mess with my life, with my family, and walk away? Kyle's face twisted into a smirk, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Even through the pain, he managed to laugh, a low, broken sound that crawled under my skin. This isn't about Megan. I pulled him closer, my grip tightening. What the hell are you talking about? He winced, his breath ragged, but the smirk didn't leave his face. You think this is about her? She's just a pawn. This is about you, David. I slammed him harder against the wall, my patience thinning. You don't know anything about me. Kyle coughed, spitting blood onto the pavement. Oh, I know enough. You screwed over my brother. You ruined his life. And now I'm going to ruin yours. The name James flashed in my mind like a trigger. It was all coming together now, the pieces falling into place, but I didn't care. Not in that moment. All I cared about was making sure Kyle knew he'd made the worst mistake of his life coming after me. I threw another punch, this time landing it square on his jaw. He crumpled to the ground, groaning, but that damn smirk stayed on his face. You think beating me up is going to stop this? Kyle wheezed, struggling to sit up. You're already done, David. I've got everything. Photos, texts, videos, all of it. And when I'm done, you're not just going to lose Megan. You're going to lose everything. The words hit like a cold slap to the face. I froze for a second, the full weight of what he was saying sinking in. What the hell are you talking about? Kyle leaned back against the wall, wiping blood from his lip, his breathing shallow but steady. I've been documenting this whole thing. Every time Megan was with me. Every text, every call, every little secret she thought you'd never find out about. I've got proof. And when I drop it, your career, your reputation, it's all gone. You won't be able to show your face anywhere. The realization hit me like a gut punch. He wasn't bluffing. Kyle had played this from the beginning, orchestrating the affair not just to hurt me, but to dismantle everything I had built. My family, my job, my life, it was all hanging by a thread, and Kyle was holding the scissors. I grabbed him by the shirt again, my mind racing. You think anyone's going to believe you? You're nothing but a lying piece of shit. Kyle laughed, the sound weak but defiant. I don't need them to believe me, David. I just need enough dirt to make them question you. And I've got plenty of that. I could feel the rage bubbling up again, but this time, it was mixed with something else, fear. He had me backed into a corner, and he knew it. Behind me, Mike shifted uneasily, his eyes darting between me and Kyle. David, what do you want to do? I stood there, staring down at Kyle, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I could finish him off right here, send him to the hospital, make sure he never crossed me again. But even if I did, the damage was already done. He had the leverage, he had the power, and I couldn't just punch my way out of this. Kyle smiled through the blood, reading my hesitation. This isn't over, he whispered, his voice barely audible, but dripping with satisfaction. This is just the beginning. I walked away that night, my fist still clenched, my mind spiraling. We left Kyle slumped against the wall, bruised and bloodied, but not broken. No, I knew he was far from broken. He had already won the first round, and now I was the one left scrambling, trying to figure out how to stop the ground from crumbling beneath my feet. By the time I got home, Megan was already in bed. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her sleep, my mind replaying Kyle's words over and over. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of the storm that was brewing just outside our door. Did she know? Did she have any idea what Kyle was planning? Or was she just as much a pawn in his game as I was? I couldn't bring myself to wake her. Not yet. Not until I had a plan. Not until I knew how to stop this from unraveling everything. But deep down, I knew. This was bigger than Megan now. Kyle was coming for me, and he wasn't going to stop until he had taken everything I had left. The next morning, Megan acted like nothing was wrong. She kissed me on the cheek, made breakfast for the kids, and headed out for another shift at the coffee shop. I watched her go, my mind still racing. I wanted to confront her, demand answers, but what good would that do? The trap had already been set, and Kyle was just waiting for the right moment to spring it. I needed to think. I needed to get ahead of this before Kyle made his next move. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Mike picked up on the second ring. "What's up?" he asked, his voice groggy. He was probably still nursing a hangover from the night before. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low. "Kyle's not done. He's got something on me, something big, and I need your help." Mike didn't ask questions. He never did. When and where? I glanced out the window, watching as Megan's car disappeared down the street. Tonight. Same place as last time. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And if Kyle thought he could take me down without a fight, he was in for a rude awakening. I couldn't shake Kyle's smirk, the way it had stayed with me long after we left him slumped against that wall. He had taken the beating, but somehow he had still managed to walk away with his head held high, like he had all the cards in his hand. And maybe he did. The thought gnawed at me every second of every day since that night. But I couldn't let it show. Not with Megan still oblivious, playing her part in this twisted game, thinking she had everything under control. I watched her closely now, noticing the small details I had missed before. The way her hand lingered over her stomach sometimes, how she avoided certain foods, how she seemed to tire more easily. My suspicion was growing, but I hadn't said anything yet. Kyle had threatened everything, but there was one thing he hadn't said, one thing he was holding back, waiting for the perfect moment to drop the final bomb. And that moment came sooner than I expected. It was a Wednesday evening, and the house was quiet. The kids were at my mother's place for the night, a rare break in the chaos of family life. Megan had been unusually quiet all day, her movements slower, her eyes distant. She barely touched her dinner, pushing the food around her plate like it was some kind of chore. I sat across from her, watching, waiting. I could feel something brewing beneath the surface, something dark and heavy that she was carrying but didn't know how to unload. The silence between us was suffocating, a thick wall that neither of us could break through. Finally, she set her fork down, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it in her lap. She didn't look up, her eyes fixed on the table. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond immediately. My heart started pounding in my chest, but I kept my face calm, waiting for her to continue. Megan took a deep breath, her fingers twisting together in her lap. "I've been feeling strange lately. Tired. Nauseous." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes narrowing. I already knew where this was going, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her. "And?" I prompted, my voice steady. She hesitated, her eyes still downcast. I'm pregnant, David." There it was. The bomb. I should have felt shock, anger, maybe even disbelief. But I didn't. I felt cold, numb. I had seen it coming like a train barreling down the tracks toward me, and now it had hit full force. But the impact didn't break me. It just left me standing there, staring at the wreckage. I said nothing, just sat there, waiting for her to say the rest, waiting for her to finally admit what we both knew. Megan's breath hitched, and when she finally looked up at me, her eyes were filled with tears. It's not yours," she whispered, her voice cracking. I closed my eyes for a second, the words settling in like shards of glass in my chest. I could feel the rage building, the betrayal, the heartbreak, but I kept it locked down. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. "How long?" I asked quietly, my voice devoid of emotion. She wiped at her eyes, her hands shaking. A few weeks. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to what? I cut her off, my voice sharper now. Didn't want to admit that you've been sneaking around, lying to my face, and now you're pregnant with his kid? Megan sobbed, burying her face in her hands. David, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. My heart was pounding, the blood rushing in my ears. You didn't mean for this to happen? I echoed, my voice rising. What the hell did you think would happen, Megan? You've been sleeping with him for weeks, lying to me, and now you're pregnant with his child. How do you come back from that? She couldn't answer. She just sat there, sobbing into her hands, her shoulders shaking. The sight of her, broken, guilty, should have softened me. Once maybe it would have, but not now. Not after everything. I walked to the window, staring out at the street, the night air still and quiet. I needed to think. I needed to get my head around this, to figure out what the hell I was going to do now. Kyle had me cornered. Not only did he have the affair as leverage, but now he had a child. My wife's child. The weight of it hit me all at once, but with it came something darker. A clarity, cold and sharp, that cut through the chaos in my mind. Kyle had set this up perfectly, and now he was just waiting for me to fall apart. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Later that night, after Megan had finally cried herself to sleep, I sat in the living room, staring at my phone. Kyle's smirking face flashed in my mind, his words from that night echoing over and over. You think this is about her? This is about you. I'm just getting started. I could see it now. The long game he had been playing. The affair wasn't the end game. It was just a means to an end, a way to dismantle me, to take everything I had and watch me burn. He had played it perfectly, using Megan as his weapon, and now he had the ultimate leverage. The child. But there was one thing Kyle hadn't counted on, me not breaking. He wanted me to spiral, to fall apart under the weight of his manipulations. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. He might have Megan, he might even have a child on the way, but he didn't have me. Not yet. I had one last move to make. The next day, I met up with Mike and the guys. We gathered at the same dive bar, the one where we'd left Kyle bleeding in the alley just days before. Mike leaned in, his expression serious, as he placed his beer on the table. What's the plan, David? He asked, his voice low. You said there was more to this. I nodded, my mind racing. Kyle's got something on me. He's documented the whole affair, texts, photos, videos. He's been holding it over me, waiting to drop it and destroy everything. But now there's more. Mike's brow furrowed. More? I swallowed hard, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. Megan's pregnant, and it's his. The table went silent. The guys exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock and anger. But Mike didn't flinch. He knew what was at stake, and he knew what had to be done. So what do we do? He asked, his voice calm. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing. We fight back. Kyle's been playing dirty this whole time, but he's not the only one who can pull strings. He thinks he's got me cornered, but I've got connections. People who can make sure he never gets the chance to use what he's got. The plan started forming in my mind, sharper now, more dangerous. I wasn't just going to stop Kyle. I was going to make sure he never came near me or my family again. That night, as I lay in bed beside Megan, her breath soft and steady, I knew what had to happen. I had been pushed to the breaking point, but I wasn't broken. Not yet. Kyle had his secrets, but so did I. And by the time this was over, he would regret ever thinking he could take me down. As I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with the possibilities, I felt something shift inside me. The rage, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they were all still there. But now, they were fuel. Fuel for the fire that was about to burn everything Kyle had built. I wasn't going to fall apart. I was going to burn him down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but ashes. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to the channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story.